A Greek slave and a British philosopher said opposite things about control. One said, "Take control." The other said, "Let go." They lived 18 centuries apart. One was born in chains in the Roman Empire. The other grew up in the English countryside and spent his life translating Eastern thought for Western ears. Their languages were different. Their traditions were different. The metaphors they reached for had nothing in common. And yet they arrived at the same destination. This is a video about that destination and about the strange fact that you can reach it from either direction. Because the paradox of control is not really a paradox at all. It is one of the oldest truths in human thought, wearing two different masks. Epictetus was born around 50 AD in Hierapolis, a city in what is now Western Turkey. He was born a slave. That was not a metaphor. He was property, owned by Epictetus, a wealthy freedman who himself had once served in the household of Emperor Nero. The ancient sources tell us that Epictetus broke Epictetus's leg. Some accounts say it was deliberate cruelty. Others say the leg was crippled from childhood and the master simply twisted it further. Either way, Epictetus limped for the rest of his life. He carried in his body the proof that other people could do whatever they wanted to him. And from that experience, from that specific embodied knowledge of powerlessness, he built one of the most enduring philosophical systems in history. After being freed, Epictetus studied under the Stoic teacher Musonius Rufus, began teaching in Rome, was eventually expelled along with all philosophers by the Emperor Domitian, and settled in Nicopolis, Greece. He owned almost nothing. He slept on a straw mat. He taught in the open air. Students traveled across the empire to hear him speak. He never wrote a single word. Everything we have from Epictetus was recorded by his student Arian in two texts, the Discourses and the Enchiridion, a short handbook that begins with what might be the most consequential opening sentence in all of philosophy. Some things are within our power, and some things are not. That is the first line of the Enchiridion. Chapter 1. Sentence 1. Epictetus does not build up to this idea. He does not ease you into it. He puts it right at the front, because he considers everything else commentary. Within our power, our judgments, our desires, our aversions, our intentions, in short, everything that is our own doing. Not within our power, our bodies, our possessions, our reputations, our political offices, in short, everything that is not our own doing. This is what scholars call the dichotomy of control, and it is ruthlessly simple. Epictetus is not offering a spectrum. He is drawing a line on one side, things you can actually influence, on the other side, everything else. And his entire philosophy flows from one instruction: stop pouring your energy into the wrong side of that line. You cannot control whether it rains. You cannot control what other people think of you. You cannot control whether your body gets sick, whether the economy collapses, whether someone you love leaves. You cannot control the fact of your own death. These things will happen or they will not happen, and your anxiety about them changes nothing except the quality of your life right now. What you can control. The only thing you can ever control is how you respond. Your interpretation. Your attention, your effort, the story you tell yourself about what is happening to you. Epictetus, the man whose leg was broken by his master, is not speaking theoretically. He is speaking from the most intimate possible knowledge that the world can do terrible things to you, and that there is a territory inside you that remains free. The dichotomy of control is not a clever idea. For Epictetus, it was survival. It was the insight that kept a crippled slave from despair. And it is fierce. Make no mistake, this is not gentle wisdom. Epictetus tells his students, if you grieve too long over a broken cup, you have misunderstood reality. If you rage at a flight delay, you have forgotten what belongs to you and what does not. He pushes the principle hard, sometimes uncomfortably hard, because he knows that half measures will not hold when life actually tests you. Now let us cross 18 centuries and most of the planet. Alan Watts was born in 1915 in Chislehurst, England. His childhood was comfortable, bookish, Anglican. At the age of 15, he became fascinated with East Asian art and philosophy. By his early 20s, he was writing about Zen Buddhism with a fluency that astonished readers who had never encountered these ideas in plain English. He moved to the United States, briefly became an Episcopal priest, left the church, and settled in the San Francisco Bay Area, where he spent the rest of his life as a writer, lecturer, and, in his own words, a philosophical entertainer. He wrote over 25 books. He gave thousands of lectures. He became one of the most influential interpreters of Eastern philosophy for the Western world. Watts had a gift for saying things that sounded paradoxical and then making you realize they were obvious. And one of his most important ideas was what he called the backwards law. In his 1951 book, The Wisdom of Insecurity, Watts argued that the relentless pursuit of security is itself the source of our anxiety. The more desperately you chase happiness, the more it eludes you, because the chasing is a form of declaring that you do not already have it. The more tightly you grip certainty, the more uncertain you feel, because the gripping is an acknowledgement that certainty is slipping away. The backwards law says, the desire for a positive experience is itself a negative experience, and the acceptance of a negative experience is itself a positive experience. Trying to control everything produces the very suffering you were trying to avoid. Watts was drawing on a principle far older than himself. In Taoism, it is called Wu Wei. Wu Wei is usually translated as non-action or effortless action, and both translations are slightly misleading. Wu Wei does not mean doing nothing. It does not mean passivity. It means acting without forcing, moving with the grain of reality instead of against it, responding to what is actually happening rather than to what you wish were happening. The Tao Te Ching, attributed to Lao Tzu, likely composed around the 4th century BC, returns to this idea again and again. The Tao does nothing, yet nothing is left undone. Water is its recurring image. The softest thing in the world overcomes the hardest. Water does not fight the rock. It does not resent the rock. It flows around the rock with perfect indifference. And over centuries, over millennia, water carves the canyon. Water shapes the stone. This is not weakness. This is intelligence. The water achieves what force cannot, precisely because it does not use force. When Watts translated this idea for Western audiences, he did not present it as exotic mysticism. He presented it as common sense that we have somehow forgotten. You cannot make yourself fall asleep by trying harder to fall asleep. You cannot relax by straining to relax. You cannot make someone love you by demanding that they love you. The moments when life works best, when creativity flows, when relationships deepen, when solutions appear, are almost always moments when you stopped forcing and started allowing. And here is where the two traditions meet. Epictetus says, divide the world into what you can control and what you cannot. Then release your grip on everything outside your control. Pour your energy entirely into what belongs to you, your judgments, your choices, your character, and accept the rest. Watts says, stop fighting reality. Stop grasping at outcomes you cannot guarantee. Let go of the illusion that more control will bring more peace. Flow with what is. These sound like different instructions. One sounds Western, disciplined, analytical, a matter of drawing clear lines. The other sounds Eastern, fluid, intuitive, a matter of dissolving boundaries. But watch what happens when you strip them down to their essence. Both are saying, stop wasting your life fighting what you cannot change. Epictetus arrives at this truth through discipline. He draws the line and says, stay on your side. Watts arrives at this truth through surrender. He says, there is no line, you were never separate from the flow in the first place, so stop pretending you are. Different methods, different metaphors, different cultural vocabularies, But the destination is identical. And the destination is this: peace comes not from controlling more, but from needing to control less. Now, the obvious objection, and it is an important one. Does this not amount to passivity? Just accept everything? What about injustice? What about cruelty? What about the things in this world that should not be accepted, that demand resistance, that require us to fight? This objection is understandable, but it misreads both Epictetus and Watts. Epictetus was not passive. He was one of the most intensely active teachers in the ancient world. He taught rigorously, challenged his students relentlessly, and demanded that they live with absolute integrity. His philosophy does not say, do nothing. It says, do everything that is within your power, and do it with total commitment. What it removes is not action, it removes the anguish over outcomes. You write the best book you can write, and you release your attachment to whether it becomes a bestseller. You raise your children with love and discipline, and you accept that they will make their own choices. You speak truth to power, and you accept that power may not listen. Watts was not passive either. He lived boldly, some would say recklessly. He crossed cultural boundaries that few Westerners of his era dared to cross. He left a secure position in the clergy to follow his intellectual convictions. He produced a body of work that reshaped how millions of people think about consciousness and reality. Wu Wei is not the same as inertia. Watts made this point over and over. The sailor who reads the wind and adjusts the sail is practicing Wu Wei. The surfer who rides the wave is practicing Wu Wei. Neither is passive. Both are acting, but they are acting in alignment with forces larger than themselves, rather than against them. The point is not resignation. The point is directed energy. It is the difference between a person who screams at the ocean and a person who learns to swim. So the paradox resolves, and it resolves simply. Letting go of what you cannot control is taking control of your life. These are not two separate acts. They are the same act, seen from two angles. When you stop pouring your energy into outcomes you cannot determine, other people's opinions, the stock market, the weather, whether the world is fair, you reclaim that energy. And suddenly you have more of it for the things that actually respond to your effort, your attention, your craft, your relationships, your character, the quality of your presence in this moment. Epictetus would say, you have finally learned to distinguish what is yours from what is not. Watts would say, you have finally stopped fighting the river and started swimming with it. The Taoist would say, you have found Wu Wei. The Stoic would say, you have found virtue. But they are all pointing at the same clearing in the forest. This is what the water teaches. It does not fight the rock. It does not resent the rock. It accepts the rock completely, and then, without effort, without struggle, over time, it reshapes the rock entirely. That is Wu Wei and Stoic acceptance captured in a single image, not passivity, not resignation, but a kind of intelligent surrender that turns out to be the deepest form of strength. A crippled slave in first-century Rome and a British philosopher in 20th-century California. They had nothing in common except the question they both spent their lives trying to answer. How should a person live in a world they cannot control? And they both arrived at the same answer. Not the same words, but the same answer. Control what is yours, release what is not. And notice, truly notice that this letting go does not make you weaker, it makes you free. The examined life does not require that you master the world. It requires that you master your response to it. And sometimes mastery looks exactly like letting go.